I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Hey, Christopher here. I've got a quick question for you to open up this episode. If you had a veterinary science degree, what would be your career options? And how many options might you have? Well, I'll tell you, I asked myself these same questions before speaking to our guest, who you'll soon meet. And to be honest, I was a bit stumped after a couple of obvious answers like being a small animal clinic veterinarian or working in a zoo. Well, let me tell you, there's truly a world of possibility and options to those who go down the veterinary sciences pathway. And by the way, that point is but one thing you're going to learn by listening in on today's career conversation. I have an excellent guest who breaks down not only her specific work as an associate veterinarian in a Japanese zoo, but also many other pertinent details about this profession that you're going to want to know about if any part of you is entertaining this career option. So to get things started, let me more formally introduce her to you, and we can do this. Miaka Ogawa is an associate veterinarian at Kobe Animal Kingdom, a zoo in Japan focused on the conservation of endangered species and showcasing animals' diverse behavioral repertoires in up-close naturalistic habitat. As a vet student, she completed her graduation thesis in the Laboratory of Veterinary Surgery, researching novel biomaterials for transplantation. And after graduating in 2023, she was thrilled to accept her current role at Kobe Animal Kingdom. And she's currently studying to obtain her certification in animal hospice and palliative care. And she has a special interest in comparative oncology and animal welfare. And in the future, she hopes to pursue residency training in zoo medicine and eventually become a board-certified specialist in the American College of Zoological Medicine. Now, Miyaka's ultimate goal is to bring this knowledge back to Japan and help educate other veterinarians in order to improve the health and well-being of zoo animals worldwide. So with all this noted, really excited to welcome you to my conversation with Miaka Ogawa. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Miaka?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to talk to you. And I always love, regaling people with stories of what goes on in the zoo. So I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really excited for this. It's funny, on this podcast, we're up to over 150 episodes, I think, 150 different professions, businesses covered. And I have not gone down the path of veterinary science, veterinary medicine, have not had anyone from your field. And I would venture to say that that's probably within the top 10 professions out there that young people aspire to. So, for that reason alone, I'm really excited for this conversation. So, yeah, with that in mind, maybe we can jump into things here. I do have this first segment lined up. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. Now, as my listeners know, it's just a segment where I read off a definition of something related to what the guest is all about. Surprise, surprise, I have you down here for veterinarian. So let me just read off this definition coming from Wikipedia, and then perhaps after you share your thoughts. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
All right, so here we go. Veterinarian. A veterinarian, or vet, is a medical professional who practices veterinary medicine. They manage a wide range of health conditions and injuries in non-human animals. Along with this, veterinarians also play a role in animal reproduction, health management, conservation, husbandry and breeding, and preventive medicine, like nutrition, vaccination, and parasitic control, as well as biodiversity, zoonotic disease surveillance, and prevention. There we go, a bit of a mouthful. And as usual, Wikipedia is great with the nuts and bolts sort of assessment, but would I be keen to hear a little bit more about some of the gaps in it, or maybe things that you'd omit or you'd add to it? What would you say?
Well, I had to be honest, I had not heard the Wikipedia definition of a vet until this episode. So I was quite impressed that, I thought it was just going to be a simple sentence about, it's a doctor that takes care of animals, but they did a pretty good job of outlining some of the really important roles that veterinarians play in society. So props to them there, whoever was the editor on that page. But yeah, of course, there's always some blanks to fill in. And while I don't take any issue with the majority of it, I think this probably just comes more as someone who has experience in the field, and kind of a joke that I've heard said often in the field itself that, I became a veterinarian because I can't stand people, or veterinary medicine because people are gross. And that is something that is a really kind of like pervasive joking idea, but
Yeah, I think I've
hear it all the
seen
time.
that before. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty widespread. And I do have to say that it is a very people-based profession. So if you do not enjoy people or enjoy talking with people, you probably will have a harder time than you were expecting, because the easiest part of my job most of the time is the animals that I deal with. The animals are a joy to deal with. And most people are too, but there's, of course, as I'm sure, as you know, being a person in society, communication between people can be challenging. And that's definitely true in veterinary medicine, especially because we have an ethical, professional, moral responsibility to be advocates for the animals. We have really specialized knowledge and training that gives us really unique insight into how an animal is really doing. And oftentimes, especially I would say in wildlife too, animals can be a lot sicker than they let on, just based on how they're behaving. Kind of takes a keen eye to be able to pick out some of the more subtler signs of pain or discomfort. And so trying to communicate that in a way that other people understand, and making sure that they can help, especially my keepers and stuff like that, they can work with me to make sure that we're getting the animals the care that they need. Yeah, it's really just constantly talking with people all day, every day, to make sure that we're making choices that are in the animal's best interest. And although I'm lucky enough to be in a zoo situation where I have a really close relationship with a lot of my keepers because I see them every day, if people are interested in veterinary medicine who want to go into small animal medicine, and you're dealing with people's pets, you might not have a standing relationship with whoever the caregiver to that animal is. So making what we understand about animals something that is easily understandable to those who might not have the medical terminology knowledge or the training behind them, making what we see accessible to others, and kind of almost being an interpreter in a way is, a huge part of the job that I think is under-recognized.
Yeah, I love that insight right out of the gate here. I mean, that's something that I wouldn't necessarily have equated, with the role, but the way you just laid it out makes complete sense. Obviously, I mean, just within the confines of what you're doing right now, the communication with zookeepers, and if there is this gray area, as you say, of trying to decipher whether or not an animal is, perhaps sick or not in the best condition, having constructive discussions about this and doing it in the right way could probably pose some challenges at different points. And the second point you raise of whether it's a veterinary clinic and you're speaking with owners and you're trying to deliver bad news, or you're trying to deliver some other information that could be complicated, and breaking things down on a more simplistic level for people to kind of keep up with you. Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's something that, again, I wouldn't necessarily have considered, but I think it sheds added insight into it all and to the work that you're involved in. So I like that. I do have this other quick question to follow up here. I mean, I think returning this point of considering your field, a lot of people might think of two options, like one, what you're involved in, working within a zoo, or, a small clinic perhaps, and tending to pets. What other options are out there?
That is a really good question. I personally feel that veterinary medicine has to be one of the most versatile degrees in the entire world. You can look, I assume that a lot of your audience is a Western audience. So, for example, if you look at the American Board of Veterinary Specialists, there's a huge variety of different things that you can specialize within veterinary medicine, from things that actually involve seeing animals directly to even working in a lab or a pharmaceutical company. The actual patient-facing specialties are anywhere from, there's like equine sports medicine, radiology, oncology, pretty much any specialty that you see in the human medical field exists in some capacity in animal medicine and veterinary medicine as well. There's also a cool specialty that's a specialty as a veterinarian in animal welfare, because, we also have a great responsibility to be animal welfare advocates and really understand what does it mean when we talk about welfare? Scientifically, how do we define good welfare and how do we make sure that we're implementing it? So from a behavioral medicine aspect, from a welfare aspect, in light of a post-COVID pandemic world, epidemiology, zoonotic disease is hugely important. So there's people that are field researchers, trying to look at the types of viruses that wildlife naturally hold to try to figure out, when the next potential outbreak, what that might look like, what are the risk factors, especially as we unfortunately are in a world where habitat destruction is pushing humans and animals closer and closer together. We're probably going to see a lot more spillover events. So an idea that is really prominent in veterinary medicine is called One Health, which basically is the idea that talks about how there really isn't a division between human health and animal health. We are one world, one planet, one health, environmental health as well. And so, yeah, basically just that one health idea. I mean, I think it shows the really, really broad ways in which veterinary medicine probably reaches everyone's lives in one way or another, from food that we put on the table to, just making sure that we don't have to all go down to lockdown again.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. I mean, that really truly opens up that spectrum of possibility for those who could be interested in this field, but just don't necessarily know what is out there. I think that sort of gives like a few different avenues for exploration. Now, returning to you in terms of your background, I certainly mentioned it off the top when I was introducing you on the program, but maybe we could hear a little bit more from you directly about what you're involved in and what you're all about.
So starting from the beginning, essentially. Well, yeah, I am one of those people. I'm glad that in the beginning of the program, you mentioned that veterinarian is one of those careers that people aspire to, because that was absolutely the case for me. When you're a little kid and you're first asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, I never had any answer besides veterinarian. And I think that was for a number of reasons. I grew up in a family of animal lovers, always had pets growing up, and my mom actually was a former jockey.
Oh, wow.
So I actually was lucky enough to grow up surrounded by, not just dogs, but a lot of horses, farm animals. And we were also really, really avid consumers of content from Animal Planet. So this is a really old show at this point, but there's a show called Emergency Vets, if you've seen it.
Don't know that one, but the first one, yeah, Animal
I mean,
Planet.
but there's a lot of great veterinary. Now I can't believe the amount of veterinary programming that's out there, especially National Geographic, Disney Plus. There's
Yeah.
tons of stuff. So, especially for those who are interested in seeing kind of some of the different aspects of veterinary medicine, a lot of the veterinary shows that you see out there can give you a good idea of just how diverse the field is. But yeah, watching that growing up, I just knew it clicked in me that that was all I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough that I never really wavered in it. I mean, I would say the closest I ever did waver is when I found out that I was allergic to all animals.
Oh,
So
no.
not all animals,
Oh, no.
all animals with fur, all mammals,
Okay.
I should say. And there was
Yeah.
a time where I was really, really worried that that was going to stop me.
That's probably a valid concern.
I did have a little bit of an existential crisis for a moment, but I was lucky enough to get matched with a great allergist and take some allergy shots. And although I still definitely do have allergy symptoms pretty much every day, they're manageable, and it's something that I wouldn't trade for the world. So, I was originally born and raised in the United States, and I always thought I was going to go to vet school in the United States, but my mom is Japanese American. And so from the time I was young, I also had a really deep interest in Japan. And I went to Japanese school as a kid. And so I actually ended up coming to Japan initially as just a gap year after I finished university, with the intention of, living for a year, trying to understand more of my Japanese roots and my background. And then I was going to head back to the United States and try to apply for vet school. And I ended up just being so interested in how differently animals are thought about and talked about in Japan, the different, ways veterinary medicine is practiced, actually. That space really interested me as like a bicultural and bilingual person. So I just decided that instead of going back to the States, I would try to apply to vet school in Japan. And that was a long and difficult road, but I did get accepted, which led to another long and difficult road. But I made it out, and I'm really happy with the decision that I made, because it opened up kind of a portion of my career that I never thought was going to be possible. So I'm really grateful for just taking that leap, I suppose.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I think when I was researching for you in this episode, like that drive to understand both sides, I suppose, like the Japanese side and their approach to, veterinary medicine and whatnot, as well as, what you've been brought up with within North America. That also sort of feeds into an ultimate goal, which is, I think, what was it, like going back to the US and maybe doing advanced studies there and then bringing that knowledge back to Japan. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
No, that's completely correct. And I thank you for remembering my profile so much. Yeah, unfortunately, Japan does not have a formal zoo medicine residency or like higher training program in the same way that is present in Europe or the United States, where there's what's called a residency. It's generally a 3-year-ish program that you complete after doing an internship in small animal rotating medicine to get your fundamentals down. Then you will go to a zoo or a university affiliated program and basically spend 3 years studying under someone who is what's called board certified in zoological medicine. So a board certified professional is someone who has passed a very, very rigorous set of standards. As far as the American College of Zoological Medicine, I can't speak for Europe because I'm not as familiar with their requirements, but the American College essentially requires that you have either completed a residency program in zoo medicine or have worked in the field full-time for at least 6 years. During that time, you have to have published 3 original research articles. So it is acceptable to have some case studies. So, for example, to write up a case report that you had, but those generally have to be something that's very novel to the field, for example, something that hasn't been described before. So generally, instead of case studies, it really is a truly well-designed prospective original research design. And after completing 3 of those, you also have to take a really, really difficult exam, which involves a reading list that I believe is like 20 plus textbooks, and
oh my
then
gosh.
5 years of current zoo medicine research in various scientific publications. So someone actually showed me a picture of all of the articles that they printed out because she was a very physical note taker, so couldn't really do the iPad thing. And her stack of papers that were going to be eligible material for that exam was over a meter high. So a meter high of current, medical research
Uh,
literature, followed by 23 plus. It's an absurd amount of information.
yeah,
So
yeah.
when I see that someone is a board certified specialist in zoo medicine, I have just the most extreme respect for them because their level of dedication and study. Yes, it is very
Yeah,
much
exactly. Yeah.
this sort of
Bow
scenario.
down to that. Yeah.
And, I've known friends or colleagues who have been great, strong zoo vets in the field for a number of years and have failed that exam, the board certification exam, multiple times. It's not easy.
The doozy, yeah.
So to be able to achieve that level of knowledge, in addition to, working in a residency program and actually getting hands-on experience with anesthesia of a giraffe or an elephant, by yourself, well, as part of the team, but being the main leader in huge scale procedure like that. Yeah, that's unfortunately not an option for studying at this time in Japan in such a controlled manner. So my goal for right now is to hopefully be accepted into a training program of some kind, become board certified, and then return to Japan at some point and try to establish a formal zoo medicine, training program here so that future generations of Japanese zoo vets can practice at the same level that, is standard in a lot of places worldwide.
Yeah, there you go. No, I love that. And I think it speaks to that point too of opening yourself up to different possibilities. Like when you are taking on international work, living experiences, things like that can arise. You might not have that game plan going into all of this, but as you sort of gain experience and as you sort of like learn more about the system and the intricacies of it all, and then also the passion sort of takes over and you can kind of connect up the dots and these pathways can take shape from those types of thoughts and reflections. So I like that. And thanks for sharing. I would like to step into yet another segment here, a day in the life, and maybe we could return to the present and what does a typical day look like for you?
This was, yeah, definitely. I was trying to think about how I would describe that before I came on to speak with you today. And it's kind of an impossible question because I
Figure
think
so.
one of the most fundamental parts of my job is I never have any idea, for the most part, what any particular day is going to bring me. I have a plan and a hope, but it very often does not end up happening that way for a variety of different reasons. And I think that kind of comes down to the fundamentally unpredictable nature of wild animals. I think an aspect that is especially relevant in my zoo's case is the way that the animals are kept or how their exhibits function. So my zoo is kind of known for having a much more open layout. I think traditionally the idea of zoos is, animals in their distinct little, concrete cages. And thankfully, from an animal welfare perspective, I think we are very much moving away from that model and focusing more on exhibits that allow animals to show the full scale of their behavioral repertoire and behave as animals should and would wild. And that diversity of behaviors is actually a really good indicator for welfare status. And there's research that points towards the more diverse behaviors that an animal shows in captivity, the better that their state of welfare can be assumed. So that obviously starts to be able to bring out a variety of behaviors. You need an environment that allows a diversity of behaviors to be shown. So in terms of my zoo, we have a lot of open space exhibits where the animals are free to roam. And there's also mixed species exhibits where the animals, much like in the wild, would potentially interact with species that are different from their own species.
Mm-hmm.
But inherent in that, much like in the natural world, is, especially within certain social groups, I think a very famous example of that is primate groups, and as we see in the primate groups that humans are, things aren't always the most friendly. So maybe they get into fights sometimes. And of course, we hope that nothing very, very serious happens. But luckily, being in a zoo environment, if something were to go wrong and an animal were to get injured, we're able to respond very, very quickly. So yeah, there's definitely parts in my day where you'll get a call that, somebody got in a fight and now we need to bring in an animal that we weren't expecting to bring in to evaluate the wounds, make sure that, it's only something minor versus something that could involve like damage to internal structures or something like that. Or, birds flying around because they have free flight. That's a hard one to say. A free flight aviary. There, I did it.
Yeah, that is a tricky one.
Sometimes, unfortunately, birds can misjudge distances or, we try very hard to make sure that they are well aware of the windows or whatever in an area. But, again, accidents can happen and sometimes they'll bump into things and hurt their wings or something of that nature. So yeah, basically, I never know when an emergency patient like that might find its way.
So when you walk in through the gates of it's Kobe Animal Kingdom, right? Like the first thing that you'd be doing, would you be checking reports maybe from the previous day or from zookeepers, fellow zookeepers, or or fellow vets perhaps, or like in terms of those kinds of details, I'd love to get a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we first walk in, well, I think in this day and age, it's really, really convenient because everyone has a smartphone for the most part. So we have an app. I don't think this exists outside of Japan, but it's called Lineworks. An equivalent outside of Japan would be like Slack. So we have like a whole zoo-wide Slack, group that has multiple sub chats. So I'm in the hospital group, and there's countless. I get text messages all day, every day from everyone. But that allows me to, even when I'm not physically there, kind of stay really on track because a really important part of the zoo world, especially because we're working with so many species across kind of, relatively large distances compared to like a small animal hospital and with a huge number of people, we always have to be in contact with one another. And I think the vets in particular very much want to hear when there's any sort of unusual something happening with an animal, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal. Someone always eats their food, but today they like left a little bit of food and that's unusual or something like that. Anytime that there's some sort of irregularity like that, we will usually get pinged on that app. And then the very first thing in the morning is all of the animal care staff will get together in our morning greeting, and we'll talk about the big things that happened the day before, as well as the big plans for the day. So that's basically how everything starts, and it just goes from there. On the days that I do know a little about what I'm doing, ideally, the majority of what I'm doing as a zoo vet is not reactive medicine, which is, like attending to an emergency, but more preventive medicine. So, I have to make sure that we're staying on top of things like regular, fecal exams in our animals to make sure that they haven't picked up some parasites that we were not expecting them to pick up. So disease monitoring in that way, vaccines, other general wellness checks on animals that maybe haven't been seen in a while. So ideally, there is, some flow in that way. And also making sure that all the animals get all of their regularly scheduled prescriptions and their medicines, and they're taking the right amount. Do those need to be updated? Do we need to do some blood work again to make sure that, we're still treating things appropriately? So I suppose that is a big part of what I do. And I will say that's probably maybe different in the United States from what I hear, because veterinary technicians or veterinary nurses, depending on where you are and how you like to be called, they have a pretty big role in zoo medicine from what I've heard with my colleagues in other countries, where they tend to be the ones that are doing more of that day-to-day preparing of the medications and running the blood tests themselves. But in Japan, or at least in my zoo, we don't have any technicians or nurses. So that's kind of unusual in the sense that, even in small animal medicine, it's very rarely the veterinarian themselves that are running the actual blood tests. That tends to be something that the assistants or the nurses or the technicians do, to allow the vets to spend more time doing what only vets can do, which is diagnosing or prescribing things.
As you're describing all of that, I think something that comes up on this program quite a bit with a number of professionals as a key for satisfaction in the work that they're doing is variety, having several different roles and responsibilities, and just the nature of your work. I mean, just, treating this animal in the morning, and then maybe this type of animal or this species in the afternoon, and constantly being presented new situations, I guess, to handle and whatnot. That must add, certainly the variety, but also a lot of satisfaction.
And I will say frustration. It is,
Yes.
it is simultaneously the greatest part of my job and my favorite part of the job, but also the one that can be the most frustrating because, inherent in the nature of having so much variety, there's so much about zoo medicine that has still not even been discovered or published or, well understood enough for us to have firm guidelines. When it comes to dogs and cats, I mean, that is, of course, I think an aspect in every part of medicine, human as well, but really the case for zoo medicine, where you might be seeing something that you're not really sure if anyone else has seen, and try to look up literature on it. You don't find, there's not a single paper on it. There's not any published recommended doses for what to do if you think you have this disease in this animal. Do they even get this kind of disease? So as someone who is naturally inclined to love solving puzzles and stuff like that, critical thinking, if you're into that sort of thing, I can't recommend this field enough, but it can take up so much of your time because I think I'm always, to some degree, concerned, like, is this really truly the correct thing? And I think sometimes nobody can tell you, even those board certified specialists who I respect so much. We all constantly come into contact with things like, I believe what I'm seeing is this. I'm going to see how they respond. Maybe we haven't ever tried this particular drug in this animal before, but, for the sake of science and for the sake of treating them to the best of how we know how to, yeah, sometimes you have to come up with some creative solutions. Another thing that I think is interesting about the field is you have to be very creative with not just your solutions to things, but physically building certain items. Dog and cat, that's a very big business, obviously. So you have a lot of, endotracheal tubes and things like that are fit and purposed
perfectly matched. Yeah.
But in zoo medicine, sometimes you're trying to use things that were made for dogs and cats in species that look nothing like dogs and cats and have completely different skin and, physiology. So
you're not going to find that on Amazon, are you?
Yeah, you're not going to find that on Amazon
those tools.
anywhere. So it's very fun sometimes to consult with other zoo vets and be like, what do you guys do when you're trying to, and you'll find the funniest pictures. I mean, people will use really, really wild items. I think one of my favorite things that I've seen is a mask for anesthesia that's just like a giant 2 liter bottle of Coke. You just cut the bottom off the Coke and then screw that into the anesthesia machine so that their head can fit.
Huh. There you go. There you go. This leads perfectly into this next segment of Q&A Discovery, where kind of continue this back and forth. And I think the first question I had lined up for you were some of these hidden intricacies, or in this case, challenges of the work that you wouldn't necessarily know about. And I think you just laid it out perfectly there. And people get a fairly good idea about what that is, and some of the skills that you would be required to have, like creativity, imagination, things that you wouldn't necessarily equate with that line of work necessarily. But on the flip side of things here, what would be some of the rewards that you wouldn't, I don't know, you wouldn't think of right away when it comes to being a vet, whether we're talking in a zoo or elsewhere?
The rewards that you wouldn't think of. That's a good question. Well, of course, it is always rewarding when you try something that you have not ever tried before and it ends up working out beautifully. You feel like a total rock star in that scenario. But I think that is maybe not something necessarily surprising. I think it's pretty par for the course that you feel a sense of success when something that you try works out. But unexpected. I guess I did not expect necessarily to enjoy the teamwork aspect as much as I do, because I think I've always been a fairly independent worker in that way. But when it comes to the scale of zoo medicine, especially, you can't do things on your own. It needs to be a team effort for everyone's safety, for the animal's safety, just in terms of physical strength that you need to be able to get something done. And so I've really enjoyed the collaborating with keepers and people that have a different set of skills and expertise than me, coming together to come up with a unique solution to a problem. One of the more rewarding cases I've had is there's a common problem in a lot of birds that are kept in captivity, sometimes where for one reason or another, they'll pluck out their feathers. It's kind of like a self-damaging behavior and a behavioral medicine issue. And we did have one bird in particular that was really prone to that behavior, unfortunately. So we had to do kind of a cross-sectional meeting. I took on some of the medical aspects of it because obviously there's stress and like a dopamine, self-harm kind of reward cycle that's happening there that we want to interrupt. There's a really, really great book called Zoobiquity by, I believe it's Dr. Barbara Natterson. I can't remember the exact specifics of her last name, but she's a cardiologist from UCLA, I believe, who made this really great book called Zoobiquity that kind of looks at how there's really common threads between a lot of the diseases that we see in animals and in people. And she talks about self-damaging behaviors are kind of maybe considered a human-only problem, but it's definitely not. When animals feel stress, that can be a behavior that is seen there as well. So understanding that from a medical perspective, some of the neurotransmitter things that are happening involved in that process. And then, of course, most importantly, how are we going to deal with it? So, I don't want to just rely completely on medication because there's probably an inciting cause for why this animal is behaving that way in the first place. So we did an entire, relook at what is his environment? What are the times of day that he is most likely to engage in this behavior? Are we missing something in terms of his health? Is he having pain somewhere that, he's showing through this behavior instead of it being just, something that he's doing for no reason? What if he's picking in that area because he might have some arthritis in that area? So we did a full body screening, preventive medicine exam. And fortunately, it didn't seem to have any systemic issues. And then we worked with the keepers to be like, well, how do we keep him engaged and happy? And how do we work on getting his behavioral repertoire more diverse? So we were able to come up with a bunch of really cool, like a feeder toy that allows him to interact with the toy and get, his daily diet through a really interactive feature. And then he also engages in free flight, where he's able to actually fly outside of the zoo and then return when he is ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Wow.
some really cool free flight programs that are happening now. So just increasing his opportunities for that. And then also to get him, more under control, having a little bit of, pharmaceutical help on board to help kind of break those addiction cycles. Yeah, now his feathers look great. He is thriving. Yeah, just being able to come together as a team and make a difference for that animal is something that happens really, really often, and I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one, it's fascinating. I think that line of study, I suppose. And hey, like a quick question too. I mean, like, did you have another species of that bird in the location who was not suffering from those ill effects
Yeah,
and was not
that's
engaging that behavior?
he was the
So it
only
was
one.
just this
Yeah,
one. So that's interesting.
so
Yeah, right?
that's why
Like,
I was definitely concerned. Does he have pain somewhere that I'm missing?
yeah.
I'm not really sure exactly what it was just in his particular case that
Hmm.
made him start doing that.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's not doing it now means that some of
Yeah.
the things that we did to try to, make his environment more interesting, keep him engaged and alert and engaging in the behaviors that we want to see in him rather than self-damaging ones. Yeah, that was.
Yeah. Well, like I said, that's it's really interesting too. And I think that point that you raised of collaboration with others, and you'd already spoken to this point of how there is that leeway to come up with solutions, whatever it might be, and I think not only yourself coming up with these ideas or proposing ideas, but then hearing from others and then taking that information or that knowledge on. And I'd assume as well, like your network of professionals that you speak with or exchange information with isn't limited to just the zoo. We're talking conferences, we're talking networks from around the world, zoos around the world. So yeah, I could see how all of that would be an enjoyable part of the work that might fly under the radar a little bit. Again, it wouldn't be something that you'd necessarily think of first off, but could definitely you derive some sense of satisfaction from that part of the job itself. So I like that.
Yeah, you made a really great point with the international collaboration as well, because that's something that I forgot to mention. But one of the things that I really, really enjoy, especially being able to speak multiple languages, being able to kind of be a liaison between international practices, different zoos from around the world, to allow the exchanging of new ideas. Like I said, we have so little data that I think that is really, really key to be able to make sure that we're all practicing at the highest level that we can. And there might be some place around the world that is, far away that has come up with a solution that's really, really innovative and brilliant. And if you can, take some of those good ideas and implement them in your own facility, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last question in this segment here. And, from the outside looking in, I would assume that, much like a physician who's treating people, that at the end of the day, when you're taking off that coat and you're going home, the work doesn't necessarily stay, stay at the facility. It probably follows you home more times than you would like. And again, I'm guessing here that this is the same for, professionals like yourself within the world of veterinary science and medicine. And what would you say to that? Like, how big of a point is that within your professional sphere?
it is a huge point, and I definitely, eat, sleep, and breathe zoo medicine, it feels like sometimes, especially if you are aiming for something like board certification. It is a huge undertaking. Or even if you're not, just the fact that it's such a huge privilege, but also responsibility to be in charge of helping these animals remain healthy, especially when you're dealing with endangered species or something of that nature. I mean, all animal life has an inherent value, and endangered species, I don't give preferential treatment to them over other animals, but there is definitely that aspect that if I fail to diagnose something that might have been treatable or preventable in some way, and we lose some of that incredibly valuable genetic diversity, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, that's
And I don't
something.
want to be
Yeah.
responsible for that. I definitely want to, I believe very strongly that zoos are key players in the efforts against fighting against extinction, wildlife conservation. So that's something that is very hard to just let go when you leave, especially when you know that you haven't quite figured out something. You know something is wrong. You have a general idea of what body system maybe is affected, but what is it? Is it this virus? Could it be this,
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, what do you do when you're battling that? You are at home. This is supposed to be your time to unwind. It's the weekend or it's after work. How do you personally? I'm sure it varies person to person, but for you, Miyaka, like what do you do to kind of like turn that off as best you can?
well, I don't necessarily turn it off a lot of the time. I
Okay.
will. There's amazing veterinary resources out there. I am a heavy user of this veterinarian only site called Veterinary Information Network, VIN. And what's so awesome about that site is on every single sub forum within that group. For example, if you go into the wildlife exotic group, there are board certified specialists on there that will answer your questions. So there's a lot of times where I'm like stuck on something that I wasn't able to figure out at work, and I will go home and I'll write a post, and just the act of like getting it out, go to bed, and then maybe in the
Yeah.
morning have some really helpful answers from a very smart and collaborative colleague that will give me new things to work on.
Okay. Well, what about like those situations? Sorry to dig, a little bit further on this, but like when it isn't so pressing, and in your heart of hearts, this isn't something that we're not talking an endangered animal being in need of some sort of treatment. It's something that you should, by all accounts, be able to kind of detach yourself from, in the moment, but you're having a tough time. Is there anything? Is it like just, Netflix, or are you binge watching something, or some exercise, or like, I know I'm getting in more of the personal side here, but I think this is
Oh, no, I'm happy
it's
to
useful
talk about the
information.
personal. But that's actually a really good point, because I was making all of this point to say that the field will absolutely consume you if you let it, because there's never going to be a time where you feel like you have enough of the answers. You're never going to have the magic crystal ball that you wish that you did that makes everything. Well, I don't know if you wish you had it, because then it wouldn't be a fun challenge. But if I did not make a conscious effort to unplug sometimes, I would never stop, because the amount of knowledge that is available in this field is more than probably any human could ever hope to obtain in their entire lifetime, even if they studied from sunrise to sunset every waking day of their life. So I've been really, really into escaping into the fantasy world of a game called Baldur's Gate 3.
Okay.
It's an RPG, so I do tend to literally physically escape by going into
Yeah.
fantasy worlds and
Nice.
solving problems in that way, and fighting battles through different graphics rather than in real
Yeah.
time. That's a really positive one for me. And I live in a really beautiful area. I'm lucky enough that I have this really awesome waterfall about 20 minutes away from my
Oh,
house.
wow.
So making sure that I take the time to walk my dog and go up to the waterfall. I live in Kobe, Japan, and so we also have a really amazing culinary scene. So
Oh, it's a great
days
city.
off,
Yeah.
yes, it's a great city. So on my days off, I try to do my best and maybe go to a shop that I've never visited and try to explore things. I mean, it comes from that same kind of probably curious mind where I'm always trying to look for something new and undiscovered, but it's done in such a way where it doesn't completely turn me into 100% workaholic, I suppose.
Right, right. Certainly the reason I asked that question, I think it's an important discussion that needs to be had more often. And I think like again, this is also part of like pulling back the curtain on the work is also how you manage the work at different points. And, hearing how just, people like yourself or others do this, I think is still valuable information and insights for young people. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to move into our crystal ball segment. And as the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. Now, typically here when we get into this part of the discussion for most professions or most entrepreneurs who come around this program, we're looking at AI and how it's affecting the work, maybe its tools. But I'd be curious to hear like what particular forms of technology are of use to you right now, or could you see being useful in the future, AI or otherwise?
I actually just came back from the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums annual conference in Sydney, and AI was definitely a hot topic of conversation there. I think that there's a really vast variety of different ways in which that technology could be useful within the zoo field, but one that I'm particularly interested in is how it can be used for behavioral monitoring in animals. Because one of the biggest, I think, challenges that we have in zoo medicine is there's never going to be enough time to do everything that we want to do for every animal. So being able to maybe use some of these newer technologies to kind of, in the past when we would do behavioral monitoring, it's truly a person sitting there, every 5 minutes tracking what behaviors are being done and stuff like that. And that's great. And, I still think we should continue to do that. But that's not always the option when you have a vast collection. In my zoo, we have 800 animals. So every animal deserves that level of attention, certainly. But by manpower, it's not the most realistic thing. So the idea of being able to put some of that work into these newer technologies that are emerging, that is a really, really powerful opportunity, I think, that will allow us to actually make science-based, data-based decisions to improve animals' health and welfare. Maybe it will, give us an opportunity to find diseases earlier. If it's something, looking at their behavior, the amount of time that this animal has spent standing up or wandering has reduced by 20% in a short time. Something's going on. Even if you see no other external parameters, just having that data in itself would be a really, really helpful indicator that there might be a problem brewing. And that's, I think, going to be something very important going forward. As, again, I have mentioned that in this day and age of, unfortunately, really, really serious environmental concerns and a rapidly amount of species disappearing off the planet, we need to make sure that we are taking care of these animals to the absolute best of our scientific ability. And so I think that, just having more data-based indicators is going to be a really, really key part of that. As well as there's some really cool things that are happening even in the medical tools themselves. For example, we do a lot of exams on the different types of cells that we pull from animals to, for example, it's called the cytology exam. Are the cells that we're getting back that we're looking at, are they healthy or do they indicate some sort of disease process? I know that there is a machine that has come out in the United States. I don't believe we have it in Japan yet, where in real time it records the veterinarian on the premises takes the sample, starts looking at the slide. That data is saved and also sent to a board certified pathologist who within 24 hours can, basically directly review your slides and give you guidance on, what they think might be happening there. Because, okay, pathology is something that we definitely do study in vet school, but the level of know-how between just a more general specialist like myself and a true board certified pathologist who, can just look at a cell and be like, oh yeah, that's this type of cancer. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And to
So
have that quick of a
yeah,
turnaround on something like that too.
not even having to physically send out a sample, but just having that data be linked together and have that be someone that you can call 24/7. They said you can consult 24/7 with their pathology line. That would be a huge game changer if you have something that is really, really emergent, and it might be the difference between, life and death in certain situations. So that's very, very exciting. Also, one of the big challenges in zoo medicine is even just the basic cells. Like the red blood cell of a bird looks completely different than the red blood cell of a mammal. And so a lot of times the diagnostic tools, for example, the automatic cell counters that we use to run a blood test, they don't work on birds. So you have to do it manually. But if you're not super great at how you are preparing your samples, sometimes you will get an inaccurate result. Talking about using machine learning to kind of train some of these future cell counter machines to be able to appropriately recognize an avian sample and actually give us better and more accurate, machine counts. So that could save a great amount of time, reduce the errors involved, and help guide more accurate and more helpful diagnoses. So yay, technology.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, right? I mean, it sounds like an exciting time, within your space in particular, with all these types of technologies evolving and certainly AI, and that being the talk of the town, certainly in a lot of different industries right now, but and a controversial one in a lot of others. But it sounds like in your field, at least, like there's a significant benefits to eventually adopting some of these practices, perhaps, or realizing some of the potential that it offers. So yeah, exciting times for professionals like yourself, because I could see how that would, ease up workloads and allow you to focus on things that, you wish you had more time for.
Time is always the most valuable resource.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, I do have one last question here for you, a words of wisdom segment. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of any direct advice, insights, or tips that you would give to somebody who's interested in studying veterinary medicine or getting involved in the type of work that you're involved in.
Well, I will be the first to admit that I'm very biased, but I would say to anyone who is interested in the veterinary field, absolutely do it. I know that, especially I hear from people working in the United States that maybe they will go to a veterinary mentor and a lot of people will say, don't do it. It's too hard of a field, or, you can't turn it off. You don't have a work-life balance anymore. I think that definitely can be the case, but, America is not the only place to work as well. So I would definitely say that don't let the scary voices that you might hear dissuade you if you think that it's something that you may be interested in. Because as we talked about earlier, the amount of things that you can do with a veterinary degree are pretty limitless. There's really interesting niches to find yourself in. I mean, I didn't expect to be spending so much of my time, being an interpreter between Japanese and English as a veterinarian and working in some of the welfare spaces that I've been invited into. That was not on my radar in my initial, emergency vet watching days career plan. So, you would be surprised at the doors that might open up to you if you are willing to maybe take a less conventional path. That being said, it is a very, very challenging one. I will not lie to anyone about that. You have to be willing to study, because to even get through the doors that you need to be in the position that I'm lucky enough to be in, it required a lot of studying things that are not fun to study, like organic chemistry or physical chemistry. Those were some of the toughest ones I've had to go through, but they all definitely serve a purpose, even if not directly. Just the amount of focus that it takes to get through it is an exercise in its own. And zoo medicine, even within an already very competitive veterinary medicine field, is one of the most competitive specialties, because I can understand why. I mean, we get to work with some of the most magical creatures on the planet. So there is a lot of competition in that way, and a lot of cost involved because there's so much competition, in terms of being willing to do a lot of unpaid internships and stuff like that. So there is some, access and equity issues involved in that. But that's another reason why I encourage people to maybe take a more broader perspective, because being willing to maybe work in places that are, outside of the West opens up a lot of doors that you might not have expected. And, I did hear from one of my most favorite mentors that in order to be a good exotics veterinarian, you first need to be a good small animal veterinarian. And I think that he could not have been more right about that. So even if you are really set on zoo medicine, I encourage people who are interested to spend a lot of time in small animal medicine. I started volunteering at my local humane society when I was 14. I started working in veterinary clinics just to get a more holistic idea of how what the field is, what medicine is, because unfortunately it is about a lot more than just loving animals. So take as many opportunities as you can to see different aspects of veterinary medicine, small animal clinics, large animal clinics. If you really are truly serious about zoo medicine, I would recommend you trying to volunteer at a local zoo, a local wildlife rehab center, and definitely join any professional organizations that you can, like the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians, European Association of Zoo Veterinarians. Join the conferences if you can. I am forever indebted to my personal great mentor, who has basically kind of walked me step by step through my career. And she is someone that I met by, during the COVID era, joining one of the AAZV, American Association of Zoo Veterinarians, online conferences, and going to a mentor-mentee mixer. And I didn't have any expectations going into that. I just kind of had a question about, could someone like me based in Japan even have an opportunity to learn and, pursue a residency program? And, we ended up meeting as a result of that, and things have just taken off from there. So yeah, take an interest in those people's stories, what they have to offer you. And yeah, just be open to learning. But if you are into creative thinking, problem solving, and you want to use those skills to be able to help alleviate animal suffering, to be able to be a voice for those voiceless animals, to help make a difference in conservation. Yeah, I don't think I could have picked a better career to do those things than the one I'm in.
There you go. With all that said, this might be a nice point to put a bow on this conversation. But I got to say, Miyake, it's been a true pleasure, and I can't believe we've blown through the entire thing. It just feels like we got started here, and I know you shared so much that listeners are going to love it. And I think you painted this really nice picture and a broad sort of perspective on it all that is going to be invaluable, insight to anyone and everyone who's interested in this field. So once again, thanks.
I'm also happy to answer any questions if people want to reach out via social media or whatnot. I'm always happy to consult with the next generation of zoo vets.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Miaka and her work, you can check out Kobe Animal Kingdom over on Instagram as well as their website, and can even follow Miaka herself on Instagram. I will have links for all of that within the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. And then lastly, as mentioned off the top, I do have some video content over on YouTube in relation to this episode, so be sure to check that out. And finally, don't forget to join us for the next episode of Life as a. You could literally be one listen away from finding your dream job. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host, and until next time, don't settle for less. Find the career you were born for.